My name is Iris Avery. I'm 35 years old, and I'm an accountant. A week after I started renovating my late dad's house, the foreman called me at 7 in the morning and said, "Ma'am, we found something. Come to the house now, and don't tell your mom or your sister about it." When I pulled up 11 minutes later, there was a police cruiser parked in my father's driveway. What the detective showed me on that little laptop screen made my blood run cold, and what I found bolted inside that wall 3 hours later proved that my quiet father, a cabinet maker who barely spoke 2 sentences at his own retirement party, had seen every bit of it coming. By Friday of that week, I was sitting across from a prosecutor with a pen in my hand, facing a choice no daughter should ever have to make. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge, where family secrets come to light, and the people who were pushed aside finally get their say. If you've ever learned the hard way that grief shows you who people really are, drop a comment below and be sure to subscribe. Because this story starts with a hole in a pantry wall, and it ends with the only thing my family ever managed to hide in plain sight: the truth. My father, Walt Avery, built cabinets for 40 years, and he treated words the way he treated lumber. You don't waste good material. He died in March, at 67, of a heart that had been quietly failing for 2 years, and he did it the way he did everything, without bothering anybody. My Uncle Gene found him in the workshop behind the house, sitting on his stool, a piece of sandpaper still in his hand. The doctors called it sudden. It wasn't sudden. He'd known for months and told exactly no one, which, if you knew my family, was the most Avery thing a man could do. The will was simple, because I'd helped him organize his papers 2 summers before. I was named executor. The house on Delmore Road, the one he kept after the divorce, the one he grew up in, came to me. My sister Brooke got his truck and the small life insurance. My mother, Lorraine, got nothing, because 6 years earlier she had divorced him and signed a settlement, and the law is unsentimental about paperwork even when families aren't. I'm an accountant. I have spent 12 years watching what money does to people at funerals, so I want to be precise about this. I didn't want the house. I wanted my dad back, and the house was what the paperwork handed me instead. Grief is like an audit. Nobody volunteers for it, and it always finds the thing you hid. At the funeral, standing over a casket she hadn't been married to for 6 years, my mother squeezed my arm and said something I didn't understand until much later. She said, "Don't worry, sweetheart, the house will stay in the family." My mother ran my father's funeral the way she ran everything, like a producer who never appears on camera. She chose the hymns. She edited the obituary. She stood at the church door in gray wool accepting condolences for a man she'd left, and half of Milford Falls called her Poor Lorraine, and nobody found it strange, because in a town like ours, a marriage certificate expires, but a story doesn't. I watched her tell my Aunt Pam a warm little anecdote about Dad's workshop that I knew for a fact never happened. When I blinked at her, she smiled at me over Pam's shoulder, the smile she's used my whole life. And later, in the car, she said it plainly, like a house rule being read aloud. "People don't need our mess, Iris. We keep the story straight." We keep the story straight. My family's entire constitution in a single sentence. At the reception, over lukewarm coffee, my sister Brooke, 29, works at the salon on 5th, perpetually $400 behind on a credit card I'd bailed out twice, leaned in and asked, "So when do we list the house?" "We." I looked at her for a second too long. I said the will had to go through probate, which was true, and that nothing was getting listed, which she didn't hear, because she was already telling me about a realtor her friend used. Neither of them asked what I wanted, and I'll be honest with you, I didn't say it either. I just filed the whole conversation away, the way I'd been filing things in that family for 20 years. What I couldn't file away was the question underneath it. My careful, quiet father had left the house to me alone, and I didn't know why. Here's why I hired the renovation company. The last 2 years of his life, my father had been fixing up the house himself. Slowly, with a dying heart, one weekend at a time. New subfloor in the hall, half the kitchen rewired, There was a notepad on his workbench with a list in carpenter's pencil, and item 9 said, "Brighten the whole place up. It's been dark long enough." A dying man's punch list. I read that line standing in his workshop a week after the funeral, and I made the only decision that ever felt clean that spring. I would finish his list, exactly, and then I would live there. Not sell it. Live in it. I'm an accountant, so I did it like an accountant. I budgeted $38,000 from my savings and his insurance, got 3 bids, and hired Buckner Contracting because Sal Buckner was the only foreman who walked the house without once telling me what my father should have done differently. Sal is 55, shaped like a rain barrel, keeps a little notebook in his chest pocket, and measures everything twice, including people. Demolition started the first Monday in June, and on day 3, before the first wall was even open, my sister showed up at the site to walk through for memories. Sal let her in because she cried a little, and then one of his crew found her alone in the pantry, not looking at anything, not touching the shelves, knocking. Knocking on the wall, low near the baseboard, softly, the way you knock when you're listening for something hollow. When Sal told me that on the phone that evening, I stood in my apartment kitchen and felt the hair on my arms stand up. I want to be clear about what I did next, because I've replayed it enough times to know I didn't sleepwalk into what happened. I acted. The morning after the knocking, I had the locks changed on my father's house, both doors and the workshop. I told Sal, in writing, that no one entered that site without my say-so, family included. I drove over and boxed up every folder in Dad's file cabinet, the deed, the will copies, the insurance, and moved them to my apartment across town. If you're wondering why my instincts were that sharp, here's the part I'm not proud of. I'd spent 20 years as this family's bookkeeper, and I don't mean the taxes, though I did those too. I mean the real books. When Dad's refunds came, I filed them before Mom could ask. When Mom's budget collapsed after the divorce, I rebuilt it at her kitchen table. When Brooke's card got frozen, twice, I paid it down and told no one, because telling someone would have made it real. That was my job in the Avery family. I absorbed the differences. Every gap between what we were and what we said we were, I covered it quietly and carried it forward, like a loss you roll into next year's ledger and never write off. So when my little sister stood in a dead man's pantry knocking on the wall like a woodpecker with a manicure, I didn't need a detective to tell me something was buried in this family. I'd been balancing around a hole my whole life. I just didn't know yet that the hole had a shape, a location, and a history older than me. That part took exactly 6 more days. Here's my oldest memory that never made sense until this June. I'm 7 years old, it's 1998, and I'm supposed to be asleep. There are voices in the pantry. Low, urgent, the register parents use when the words are too big for the house. Through the crack in my door I can see my father kneeling by the baseboard, and the baseboard is wrong. It's sticking out like a loose tooth, and my mother is standing over him with her arms crossed, saying something I can't hear except for the word half. The next morning, my grandmother's rings, the ones I'd only ever seen in a velvet box, were on my mother's hand at breakfast. "Grandma wanted me to keep them safe," she said, buttering toast, not looking at anyone. My father drank his coffee and studied the window like there was weather in it. The rings never went back in the box. The box was never mentioned again. And here's the part that tells you everything about my family. Neither was anything else. No fight, no explanation. The whole event sank out of sight like a stone in a pond, and the pond was proud of how smooth it stayed. I was 7, so I filed it under things adults do. It took me 27 years, a dead father, a hole in a wall, and a police detective to understand what I'd actually watched through that door crack. The opening move of a war. A quiet, patient, decades-long war fought entirely in the dark over a ledger no court would ever see. And both of my parents were soldiers in it, and my sister and I were born on the battlefield and called it home. Day 3 of the renovation, my mother and Brooke came to the site together. I wasn't there. I was at my office, up to my elbows in a client's quarterlies, so I got it afterward from Sal, who reports conversations the way a transcript would, which I've come to love about the man. My mother arrived in her church cardigan and asked, pleasantly, to go inside and collect some family things. Sal said he couldn't do that, ma'am. Owner's orders, no entry without authorization. My mother's pleasantness dropped 1 degree per sentence after that. She informed him she was Walt Avery's wife. Sal, may he live forever, looked at his clipboard and said, my paperwork's got a different owner on it, ma'am. Brooke tried the other road. She knew where a few of her things were. It would take 5 minutes. Nobody had to bother Iris about it. Nobody had to bother Iris. That sentence did a lap around my skull for days. Sal offered to pass along a list of items for the owner to review. They left without giving him one. And then Sal did the thing I will owe him for until I die. He called me, reported all of it, and said, I'd like to hang a couple of battery cameras if it's all the same to you. Site theft's a plague these days. Copper, tools, you name it. A beat. And ma'am, I didn't much care for how the older one kept looking at the pantry wall. I authorized the cameras on the spot, and I upgraded the padlock on the fence gate myself that evening. I did everything a careful person does. Hold on to that fact. It matters to me that you know I locked every door I had. Thursday night, the 6th night, I almost called my mother. I sat at my kitchen table with the probate folder squared in front of me. I square folders when I'm nervous. It's free therapy. And I typed out a text. Mom, let's talk about the house like adults. Whatever you think is in there for you, let's put it on the table. I looked at that message for a long time. You have to understand what that text was. It was my whole career in this family, condensed. Find the gap. Name the number. Reconcile it quietly before anyone does something that can't be undone. The bookkeeper's reflex, 20 years deep. And some newer part of me, some part that had been growing since I watched my mother accept condolences for a man she'd left, looked at that reflex and asked one flat question. How many times have you balanced this family's books, and has the debt ever once stopped growing? I deleted the text. Not out of anger, out of arithmetic. You don't keep funding a loss with no plan. I closed the folder, washed my one dish, and went to bed. And for the first time since March, I slept 8 full hours, deep and dreamless. The sleep of a woman whose locks are all locked and whose cameras are all hung. I want you to remember me like that. Asleep, folders squared, every door secured, every reasonable thing done. Because while I slept, a little after 1:30 in the morning, 2 figures climbed the construction fence at my father's house, crossed the yard without a flashlight they didn't need, and let themselves toward the pantry wall with a drywall saw. They didn't wander. They didn't search. They knew exactly where they were going. The call came at 7:12 on Friday morning. I know because I was pouring coffee and the mug is still chipped from where I set it down too fast. Sal Buckner does not have a worried voice. I'd heard the man discuss a cracked sewer main like a weather report. But the voice on my phone that morning had gravel in it that wasn't usually there. Ma'am, we found something at the house. I need you to come now. I said okay, and asked what kind of something, already reaching for my keys. And then Sal said the sentence I will hear for the rest of my life, the one I later learned he'd thought about for a full minute before dialing. Come to the house immediately, but don't tell your mom or your sister about it. Not till you get here. Please. Please. From a man who says ma'am to fence posts. I don't remember locking my apartment. I remember the drive, 3 miles across Milford Falls, past the square, past my own office, every red light personally offensive, and I remember doing the thing I do under pressure, which is count what I know. 1. Something was found. 2. It involved my mother and my sister, or Sal wouldn't have fenced them out of the call. 3. Sal's voice had said found something, but his tone had said something happened, and those are different columns in the book, and my stomach already knew which column we were in. I turned onto Delmore Road with the sun coming flat through the sycamores, and I saw it from 4 houses away, parked in my dead father's driveway where his truck used to sit. A police cruiser. Lights off. Nobody hurries with the lights off. Whatever it was, It had already happened. The pantry smelled like cut gypsum, a dry, chalky smell I now file next to hospitals. There was a hole in the wall, low, near the old baseboard, maybe 18 inches square, cut clean on 3 sides and snapped along the 4th. White dust on the floor in a fan pattern, one boot print pressed into it, small. And behind the opening, where there should have been studs and insulation, there was a cavity. A built compartment, framed, sanded, edges eased with a router, because even my father's hiding places got finish work. It was empty. You could see the rectangle in the dust where something had sat for years, a clean shadow with rounded corners, the ghost of a box. Sal stood next to it like a man guarding a casket, notebook out, saying nothing. The detective introduced herself as Renata Cruz, mid-40s, calm the way ER nurses and good bookkeepers are calm. She walked me through the morning. Crew arrived 6:50, found the gate lock cut, the back door jimmied, the wall open. Called 911 first, company policy, insurance requires it, then called the owner. "Ma'am," she said, "did you know this compartment existed?" I said no, and it was the truth. And it tasted strange, because I had spent my whole life certain that I was the one person who knew where everything in this family was kept. I looked at that empty, carefully crafted little vault, built by my father's hands God knows how many years ago, and I heard my sister's knuckles on the wall, and my thoughts must have shown, because Detective Cruz watched my face and said gently, "There's something else. The sight cameras were running. I'd like you to look at some footage." We stood at Sal's plywood work table and Detective Cruz opened a laptop. And I want to tell you exactly what I saw, because people always ask what it feels like, and the honest answer is that it feels like arithmetic. The timestamp read 1:47 a.m. The camera on the fence line caught them first. 2 figures coming over the chain link, one boosting the other. The taller one moved like her knees hurt. The shorter one wore a hoodie I recognized because I was with her when she bought it. They crossed my father's yard in the dark without one wrong step. No flashlight until they were inside, and then a phone light with a cloth over it. A trick you use when you've thought about this in advance. The second camera, the one Sal had hung in the hallway, because the coppers in the walls, ma'am, caught the rest. The taller figure walked into the pantry and did not search. She pointed. Low, near the baseboard. One gloved finger, twice. Impatient. There. The shorter one knelt with the drywall saw. 11 minutes of cutting, and then, at 2:03 a.m., pulling the box free, the taller one turned to check the hallway, and the phone light came up, and the camera got her face. My blood went cold in a way I can only describe professionally. Every number I had ever balanced for this family recalculated itself at once, 20 years of entries reversing, and the new total stood there on a laptop screen in glove and hoodie. My mother, my baby sister holding the saw. In my dead father's house, at 1:47 in the morning, 11 days before his headstone was even delivered. Detective Cruz let the frame sit, then asked, quiet as a pulse check, "Ma'am, do you recognize these individuals?" And I stood in the house my father left me, with his sawdust still in the corners, and for the first time in my life as this family's bookkeeper, I did not have an answer ready. I asked her for a minute. She gave it to me. I walked out to the backyard and stood by my father's lumber rack because I needed to be near something he'd stacked with his own hands, and I watched my own mind do its trick. It started immediately. The reflex, smooth as a payroll run. Okay, the wall is maybe 800 to repair. I can cover that. Maybe Sal doesn't need the report to go anywhere. Maybe I call Mom. We handle it in the family. Brooks got that record from the shoplifting thing at 19. A charge would end her. I can absorb this. I can absorb this. I stood there in the June sun listening to myself plan the cover-up of a crime committed against me, in my own house, by the people who'd committed it, and for the first time in 20 years I heard the reflex from the outside. It didn't sound like love. It sounded like a machine that had been running so long nobody remembered switching it on. The Avery reconciliation engine. Me, taking every gap between what this family was and what it claimed to be, and quietly eating the difference. My whole childhood I thought I was holding the family together. Standing by that lumber rack, I finally ran the other hypothesis. Maybe I was just the reason nothing ever cost anybody anything. I hadn't decided a single thing yet when Sal came around the corner of the workshop, moving carefully, holding something flat in both hands like it might go off. Crew found this when they were photographing the cavity for insurance, he said. It was bolted to the back stud. Whoever emptied that wall missed it. It was behind where the box sat. He held it out. A manila envelope, dusty, sealed, with my name on it in carpenter's pencil. Iris only. Detective Cruz checked the envelope first, photographed it, logged it, confirmed it wasn't part of the crime she was investigating, since the crime hadn't managed to reach it. Then she handed it to me, because I was the owner of the house, the executor of the estate, and, apparently, the addressee. We'll be processing the scene another hour, she said. The stolen item from the dust impression was a metal box, roughly ammunition can size. When we have the file together, I'll ask you to come in. You'll have some decisions to make. Decisions. Plural. She said it kindly, the way you warn someone the water's deep. I took the envelope to my car, and I'm not ashamed to tell you my hands were not steady, which for me is saying something. I've signed audit findings that ended men's careers with a steadier grip. It was his printing. Block capitals, carpenter's pencil, the same hand that labeled every jar of screws in that workshop. My silent father, who in 67 years never once said the word feelings in my presence, had bolted an envelope with my name on it inside a secret wall, behind a decoy, at a height and depth where only someone tearing the whole cavity apart in daylight would ever find it, which meant he had thought about who would be tearing, and when, and in what light. I sat in the driver's seat with the envelope on the steering wheel for a while. Across the yard, through the pantry window, I could see the hole in the wall. The little black rectangle my family had finally, literally, become. Then I did what Averys apparently do at the edge of every cliff. I opened it carefully, so nothing would tear. Inside the envelope was one page, and taped to the bottom of the page, under a strip of masking tape gone amber with age, was a small brass key. The letter was short, because of course it was. He measured words like board feet. Iris, if you're reading this, the wall's been opened, and I think we both know by whom. Don't blame yourself for not stopping it. I built this family's habits before you were born, and a man who hides things teaches everyone in the house that hiding is how it's done. That's my sin, and I own it. The box they took holds what they came for. Let them have it. What's yours is under the south leg of my workbench. Floor safe. This key. Every wall gets opened someday, kiddo. I built enough of them to know. I'm sorry it was you holding the flashlight. Dad. I read it 3 times. I peeled the key off with the kind of care I usually save for old tax documents, and it sat in my palm weighing nothing. A little brass fact my father had aimed across time, past his own death, past a decoy box, past my mother's certainty and my sister's saw, directly at me. 2 things happened in my chest at once, and I've stopped pretending they're contradictory. Grief, because my father had known his family so precisely that he'd built the burglary into the architecture, and had still gone to his grave saying nothing, fixing nothing, just planning around us like weather, one hiding place deeper. And underneath the grief, cold and clean as brass, focus. Because the box they took holds what they came for. Let them have it was not the sentence of a victim. It was the sentence of a carpenter who'd measured twice. Whatever my mother and sister were prying open at that exact moment, in whatever room, with whatever crowbar, my father had packed it for them personally. I put the key in my shirt pocket, buttoned it, and drove back to work like a citizen. Detective Cruz called me at 4 that afternoon. The stolen box had been found, tossed in the dumpster behind the Save-A-Lot on the south side, which happens to be a 9-minute walk from my mother's duplex, a detail nobody in law enforcement needed my help interpreting. The box was a green metal ammunition can, Army surplus, my father's brand of container for everything from deck screws to Christmas lights. Inside it, Cruz said, was newspaper. Not wrapped around anything. Just newspaper. The Milford Falls Courier, cut with scissors into neat rectangles, stacked and banded like currency, a full can's worth of nothing, prepared by somebody with patience and a paper cutter. And on top of the stack, in a sandwich bag so it wouldn't yellow, a note in carpenter's pencil. Cruz read it to me over the phone, flat, professional, while I sat at my desk with my eyes closed. Lorraine, I knew you'd measured twice and cut once. We're even for 1998. Let the kids out of this. W. We're even for 1998. My father had known about the rings, had known for 27 years, through every silent breakfast, every smooth Thanksgiving, every year the pond stayed proud of itself. He'd known, said nothing, and built a second wall next to the first one with a punchline inside it. If a letter from someone who's gone has ever knocked the wind out of you, tell me about it in the comments below. I read every one. And if you're new here, subscribe, because the floor safe under that workbench was still waiting, and what it held was the part of my father I'd been missing my whole life. My mother, meanwhile, had cut a hole in a dead man's house and stolen a can of confetti. My mother called Saturday morning, and I want you to appreciate the performance, because it deserves review. Sweetie, Pam says there was a break-in at your father's place? Honestly, this town anymore. Was anything taken? You know, a house sitting empty like that is a magnet. You really should sell it. Let it be somebody else's worry. 4 sentences, and every one of them working. Establish she'd heard it secondhand. Establish concern. Fish for what I knew. Steer toward the sale. I've watched auditors with subpoenas do less in an hour. I gave her the accountant's special. True, minimal, useless. Police are on it. Insurance is handling the wall. There was a pause I could have parked a truck in, and then my mother said, softer, in the voice she saves for house rules. Well, whatever happens, we handle things as a family. We keep the story straight, Iris. No police in family matters. We keep the story straight. 3rd time in my life I'd heard it said out loud, and the first time I heard what it actually was. Not wisdom, not dignity. A gag order, passed down like a casserole dish, mother to daughter, 1976 to 1998 to now. I said, the story's with the county now, Mom, which was technically just a fact about paperwork, and she laughed her hostess laugh and changed the subject to Pam's hip. We hung up like 2 diplomats. And here's the detail I keep coming back to, the one that made my skin crawl in a way the footage somehow hadn't. In 4 minutes of concerned motherly conversation about a burglary at her ex-husband's house, my mother never once asked what had been inside the wall. You don't ask questions you think you already know the answer to. I took my Uncle Gene to the coffee shop on the square, and I put it to him straight. 1998. The rings. The baseboard. Tell me the real books. Gene is 70, retired from the county garage, and he'd been carrying his brother's secrets so long they'd worn a groove in him. He didn't even pretend to be surprised. He just looked relieved, like a man finally allowed to set down a ladder. The real books were about what I'd figured. Grandma's rings had been left to Walt for his girls. My father hid them in the first wall cavity, behind the pantry baseboard, because by 1998, the marriage was already a cold war over money. My mother had spent them into 3 foreclosure scares by then, Jean said, not maliciously, just relentlessly, plugging the hole in herself with catalog orders while my father plugged his with hidden cash, each of them absolutely certain the other one had started it. Mom found the baseboard cavity that spring, took the rings, called it her share, out loud once. Half of everything in this house is mine, no matter whose name is on what. And then the family did what my family does. Nothing. Your dad wanted to raise it at Christmas, Jean said, turning his cup in circles. Your grandma, his own mother, talked him out of it. Said, and I quote, a scandal costs more than rings. He looked at me then, tired and fond. Your dad built cabinets his whole life, Iris, but the first secret compartment in that marriage wasn't his, And the last one wasn't either. He just built better ones. I paid for the coffee, drove to my father's workshop, and knelt at the south leg of his workbench. The floor safe was where the letter said, under a trapdoor of tongue and groove so tight you could have hidden it from a tax auditor with a flashlight. I swept off the sawdust. Even his camouflage was tidy. And the little brass key turned like it had been oiled in anticipation, which, knowing him, it had. Inside there were 3 things. 1, cash, banded in rubber bands by denomination, which I counted on the workbench with bank teller hands because counting is how I stay upright. $23,600. His quiet money, decades of it, the retirement he didn't live to spend. 2, a folder of originals, the deed, his discharge papers, the title history of the house going back to his father, and 3, taking up most of the safe, rubber-banded into bundles by decade, envelopes, 22 of them, each one labeled in carpenter's pencil with a year and a name. Iris, 1991. Iris, 1996. Iris, 2007. Letters. Unsent letters, one for almost every year of my life, written by a man who in person could not reliably produce the sentence, "How was school?" I sat down on his stool, the stool, and I opened the one marked with last year. I'm not going to read you all of it. Some of it belongs to just us. But I'll give you the 2 lines that rearranged me. I watched you carry this family's book since you were 12, and I let you, because it was easier than opening mine. That's the coldest thing I ever did to anybody. And further down, after some carpentry talk, this. Money hidden in a wall doesn't grow, kiddo. It just waits, and it teaches everyone in the house to dig. Everything I hid because of her. And everything she took because of me. Don't inherit the war. It's the one thing in this house I never wanted to leave you. I closed the letter. Outside, a June evening was going gold over the yard. Somewhere across town, my mother still thought she'd won a can of newspaper. Here's what I did with what I found, and I did it all in daylight, on paper, with my own name signed at the bottom, because I had finally located the family disease, and I intended to be the end of the transmission line. Monday morning, 9 o'clock, I sat with the estate attorney and amended the probate inventory. $23,600 in cash, found on the premises, property of the estate of Walter Avery, logged, deposited into the estate account, taxed, however the law said it got taxed. My father hid that money for 40 years. It took me one morning to put it back on the books, and I won't lie to you, my hand shook a little doing it. It felt like breaking a family commandment carved somewhere below Moses. Then I drove to the station and gave Detective Cruz the rest, the decoy note, photographed front and back, and the fact that the 1998 in it referred to a prior incident inside the family, which meant the wall cavity's existence was known to at least one of the individuals on the footage. I handed over evidence that muddied my own clean victim story, because the full truth included my father's game. And Cruz looked at the photos, then at me, and said the sentence I've decided to take as a compliment for the rest of my life. Ms. Avery, you're the first person this year to walk in here and hand me the inconvenient half of their own file. I told her the truth. I'm an accountant. A ledger that only shows one column isn't a ledger. It's a story. And my family already had enough people keeping the story straight. Tuesday, she called. The file was complete. Could I come in Wednesday morning? The conference room at the Milford Falls Police Department has a coffee maker older than my sister and a whiteboard nobody's fully erased since at least Christmas. Detective Cruz sat me down with stills from the footage printed 8 by 10. The pointing finger, the saw. The face turned into the phone light. 2:03 a.m. burned into the corner like a brand. Assistant District Attorney Whitfield came in for exactly 90 seconds, a man with the energy of someone triple-booked since 2019, and laid out the mechanics without drama. Breaking and entering an unoccupied structure. Theft, petty. given that the appraised value of a can of cut newspaper is zero, which he noted was the first time a burglary victim's father had ever preemptively devalued the loot. The county had a first offender diversion track for exactly this shape of case, but nothing moved without a signed complaint from the property owner. "You have until Friday close of business," he said. "After that, with a nonviolent entry, minimal loss, and a family relationship, this file closes itself." And he was gone, and it was just me and Cruz and the printed stills. She squared the photos. She squares things too, I noticed, and asked the question the room had been holding. "For the record, Ms. Avery, do you recognize the individuals in these images?" I looked at the faces I'd known longer than my own. The woman who taught me to read. The girl whose credit card I'd quietly buried, twice, and I heard my own voice, level, doing the bravest bookkeeping of its career. I need, until tomorrow morning, not to decide whether I know them, to decide what I owe them. Cruz nodded slowly. "Go home, Ms. Avery. The record can wait one night." My doorbell rang at 9 that night, and it was Brooke, alone, no makeup, wearing the hoodie, the actual hoodie. I swear my sister has never once considered evidence in her life, and holding a gas station peace offering of the candy we split as kids. She talked for 10 straight minutes and I let her, because the shape of the flood tells you where the water's been. It came out in pieces. Mom had said it wasn't stealing. You can't steal what's already yours. They were just getting back what Dad owed her before the house sold. Brooke needed money. The card was frozen again. There was a payday loan I didn't know about. And Dad left you everything, Iris. You, the one who didn't even need it. So what was one box out of a wall to me? Then the flood hit the thing it had been circling. You can't sign anything, Rissy. The childhood name, deployed like a coupon. Family handles family. We don't do police. We never have. You know how we do things. I do know how we do things, I said. And then I asked her the only question I'd been carrying since the laptop screen. "Who held the light, Brooke?" My sister went still, 29 years old, standing in my doorway between a payday loan and a felony, and I watched her run the family arithmetic. Protect Mom, protect the story. And I watched it not add up for the very first time. She didn't answer. She put the candy on my counter like an offering at a shrine, said please in a voice from when she was 6, and left. I stood at my own mirror for a long time that night, and the woman in it looked like both of them. I didn't sleep much, and I'm glad, because that night deserved witnesses. I sat with my father's letters spread on the table, 22 years of a man learning too late how to speak, and I made myself do the exercise I make clients do when they can't see their own business clearly. Write down what the money story is really about. So I wrote, "Mom didn't cut that wall for a can of cash. She cut it because for 31 years she kept a ledger no court would honor. Every meal cooked, every floor scrubbed, every catalog dream she plugged into the hole where a partnership should have been, and when the law handed her half a car and a television, the wall became the only bank that still owed her. She wasn't wrong that she was owed. She was wrong about who was ever going to pay it, and she'd spent 6 years teaching my sister that the debt could be collected in the dark from a dead man's house. And me? I was the co-signer. Every quiet bailout, every absorbed difference, every story I helped keep straight. I had personally guaranteed this family's belief that the dark was free. If your own family ever asked you to keep it quiet just one more time, comment the word daylight below. I want to know I'm not the only one. And subscribe, because what my mother offered me that Friday morning, standing in a half-painted kitchen with a box of cookies on the counter, is the part of this story I still can't tell without my hands going cold. At sunrise, I drove to the station and I gave Detective Cruz her answer for the record. Both names. Out loud. Mine to say. And I said it. It was Thursday, 8:05 in the morning, and the conference room coffee maker was making its dying animal noise, and Detective Cruz set the recorder going and asked, "One more time, formally, do you recognize the individuals in this footage?" And I looked at the 8x10s one last time, the pointing finger, the saw, the face in the phone light. And I said it. That's Lorraine Avery. That's Brooke Avery. My mother and my sister. 4 seconds, maybe 5. That's how long it takes to end a life's career as your family's darkroom bookkeeper. Nobody gasped. The coffee maker gurgled. Cruz wrote in that even hand of hers, and I sat there feeling the strangest thing, which I've since decided was the sensation of a closing entry. The moment at the end of a fiscal year when you zero out the old accounts, and whatever's left is just true. For what it's worth, Cruz said, clicking off the recorder. Most people in your chair never say the names. They let us fail to identify. The file dies quiet and everybody goes back to Thanksgiving. I asked her what happens to those families. She thought about it longer than I expected and said, "They come back. Different year, different wall. Different wall." My father could have built that sentence. I signed the identification statement. Not the complaint yet. That was still Friday's cliff. And I stood up feeling lighter and worse, both at once. The way you do when the anesthesia is honesty. In the parking lot, I said it out loud to nobody. To the June morning, to the ghost of a man labeling jars of screws. "I'm done keeping the books in the dark, Dad." By sundown, the whole family knew what I'd done. All of it. Every phone in the Tri-County area, ringing. Aunt Pam called first, of course. Pam, who has never in her life dialed a phone for a reason that wasn't broadcasting. "Iris, honey, families don't do this to each other." I asked her, genuinely curious, which part she meant. The drywall saw at 1:47 in the morning, or the paperwork at 8:05. And Pam said I knew exactly what she meant. And I did. She meant the paperwork. In my family's operating system, cutting a hole in a dead man's wall is a private weather event, but naming it in a public building is a betrayal of the blood. Then it was 2 cousins, then my mother's church friend Dolores, whose voice trembled with the pleasure of it, and by Friday my mother's congregation had settled on its official text. That poor Lorraine's ungrateful daughter, the one who got everything, called the police on her own grieving mother. A client of 11 years moved his taxes to a firm in Springfield. His wife sings in that choir. I didn't correct any of them. I want you to understand that choice, because it wasn't numbness and it wasn't nobility. Correcting the record is just begging with extra steps. And I'd watched my mother spend her whole life managing the audience, and I knew the only way out of that theater was to stop performing in it. Let the story be crooked in other people's mouths. Mine was finally straight. Uncle Gene texted me one line that Thursday night, and I've kept it. "Your dad measured twice. Your turn to cut." And Friday morning, before I could drive to the prosecutor's office and cut, my mother's Buick pulled into the driveway of my father's house, where I was meeting Sal, and she stepped out holding a box of cookies. She came into the half-finished kitchen like a woman visiting a sick friend, cookies on the counter, coat folded over her arm, a glance at the primer on the walls that said, "Well, it's no worse than I expected." Sal evaporated with a contractor's 6th sense, and my mother stood in the house she'd cut a hole in 8 days earlier, and she opened with memory. The good Christmas, the year of the blue bicycle. Wasn't this kitchen always cold in winter? Building the set? Dressing the stage? I let her finish. And then, because I'd learned it from a detective, I stayed level and just said, "Mom, I've seen the footage." What happened in her face wasn't guilt. It was recalibration. She sat down on Sal's sawhorse bench like it was a church pew, and for the only time in this entire story, my mother told me the truth. 31 years I cleaned this house, Iris. I cooked in this kitchen when it had no heat. I raised 2 girls 15 feet from that pantry. Nobody pays you for that. Nobody puts your name on anything for that. The court gave me half a car and a television, and everybody clapped like it was fair, because it was legal. Her hands were flat on her knees, steady as headstones. "Your father hid money from me our entire marriage. You found some of it, don't tell me you didn't." Well, that wall was the only bank that ever owed me, and I made a withdrawal. I'm not sorry. I raised the teller. I stood in that kitchen and understood my mother completely. The ledger no court would honor. 31 years of unpaid entries, all of it real. Understanding is not absolution. It's just a better diagnosis. Then she made her offer. "Here's what we're going to do," my mother said, and her voice changed key. The producer's voice, the one that ran a funeral for a man she'd divorced. "You go down there today and tell them you were mistaken. Grainy video, dark. Could have been anyone. They see it all the time. Nobody fights it. The file closes. I drop this nonsense about contesting the will. The house is yours, sweetheart. Truly, I mean that. Brooke pays for your wall out of her own pocket if it takes her a year, and we are a family again. Sunday dinners, your father's first anniversary in March. We'll cook. All of it, Iris. All you have to do is one thing you've done your whole life beautifully." She smiled at me then, and it was a real smile, which is the part that still gets me. "Sign nothing. We keep the story straight." And then she reached into her coat pocket and set a small velvet box on the sawhorse bench between us, and opened it, and my grandmother's rings looked up at me for the first time in 27 years. "These were always meant for the oldest girl," my mother said softly. "Take them. They should stay in the family. I want to be honest with you about that moment because this channel is worthless if I lie to you here. It worked. For 3 full seconds it worked. Sunday dinners. My mother's voice on the phone about nothing. Brooke's kids someday, in this kitchen, warm. The entire dream I had been buying installments on since I was 12 years old, wrapped in velvet, on a sawhorse, one silence away. My hand went out and touched the box before any part of me voted on it. The rings were smaller than I remembered. Everything from 1998 was smaller than I remembered, except the wall, which had a hole in it I could see from where I stood, just past my mother's shoulder, over the cookies. I had one question left. I asked it. I kept my hand on the velvet box, and I looked at my mother, and I asked her the only question that had ever mattered, in the flattest, kindest voice I own. If the camera had caught someone else's face, Mom, anyone else's, would you be standing in this kitchen with cookies? The primer fumes ticked. A sander started up somewhere out front and thought better of it. My mother opened her mouth, and I watched her reach for the answer, watched her hunt through 31 years of managed stories for the version where she says, "Of course, sweetheart, this is about family, not about the footage." And my mother is many things, but at close range in an empty kitchen, to the daughter who does her taxes, she could not find a way to sell it. The silence went 1 second past survivable, then 2. Her chin came up. Not down, up. My mother armors where other people crumble. And she said, "That's not what happened, so it doesn't matter." And that was the answer. Complete. If it hadn't been her face in the light, there would be no cookies, no rings, no Sunday dinners on the table. There would be a prosecution, loudly demanded of whatever stranger dared cut her family's wall. The offer wasn't love. It was a settlement, priced at exactly 1 daughter. And here's what I felt, and you've earned the truth of it. Relief. The same terrible, clean relief you feel when a number you've been forcing for years finally refuses to balance, and you get to stop pretending the book's close. For 20 years, I'd believed there was some final quiet service that would buy my seat at this family's table, and there was no seat. There was a teller's window, and I'd been standing at it my whole life. I closed the velvet box, gently, and slid it back across the sawhorse to my mother. "It was Grandma's," I said. "It stays with the real ledger." She didn't understand me. That was all right. The prosecutor would. I was at the county building by 11:40. ADA Whitfield had the complaint ready, dry language, case numbers, my father's address rendered as the premises. And I read every line, because I signed nothing unread, and then I did the thing that ended one version of my life and started another. I signed my name, in full, in blue ink, under the sentence that named my mother and my sister as the individuals I had identified. And then I handed Whitfield the second document, the one I'd typed at 5 a.m. at my kitchen table with my father's letters stacked beside the laptop. a formal request from the victim that both defendants be evaluated for the county's first offender diversion program, that restitution be limited to actual repair costs, which I'd itemized to the dollar, because of course I had, that the victim affirmatively did not wish to see jail time pursued. Whitfield read it twice and looked at me the way you look at a museum exhibit. In 11 years, he said, I've had victims want blood and victims want it to vanish. I don't get a lot of invoices for mercy. I told him what I'd finally figured out in a half-painted kitchen that morning. I wasn't there for revenge, and I wasn't there for rescue, because both of those were just the old family jobs in new clothes. I'm done keeping the books in the dark, I said. This is what daylight costs. All of us. Itemized. I called my mother from the parking lot because she deserved to hear it from my mouth and not from Pam's. I told her what I'd signed and what I'd asked for. No jail, a program, repayment done. There was a long quiet, and then my mother said, in a voice with no key at all, the story was never crooked until you, Iris. And I said the last thing I've said to her to this day. The story was never straight, Mom. It was just quiet. Then she hung up, and the price was paid, and it was enormous, and I drove back to the house. Here's what happened with the charges, told in ledger style, because that's the only honest register I've got. Brooke took the diversion deal at her first appearance. Her public defender had it arranged in a week. Program, restitution, record wiped on completion. She cried in the hallway of the county building, and I know because I was there, 3 seats down, and I didn't go to her, and it was the hardest bookkeeping of my life. My mother was a different story. Briefly, she hired an attorney. She was going to fight it, tell the whole history in open court. The marriage, the hidden money, 31 years of unpaid everything, all of it, on the record, in front of the town. For 9 days she held that position, and then she discovered what her attorney had to tell her, that a trial is public. Reporters from the Courier public. Choir hears everything public. Every catalog debt, every foreclosure scare, every hidden can. The whole unedited story, told by strangers, in a room she couldn't produce. My mother, who cut a hole in a dead man's wall at 1:47 in the morning rather than let the neighbors see her need, that woman was never, ever going to let the story run crooked in public. She took the diversion, signed the same page her granddaughter's babysitter could have negotiated, paid her half of a drywall repair on a payment plan, and told the church it had all been a misunderstanding among family, which, for once, was almost true. I didn't do that to her. I want that on the record. I never said a word to a reporter, a cousin, or a choir member. The silence she'd worshipped her whole life, the god of keeping the story straight, turned out to be the only prosecutor she couldn't face down. That Friday evening, I went back to the house, and Sal was in the pantry with his notebook, squaring up the damage for the repair order. He tapped the hole with his pencil. Crew can have this patched and painted by Tuesday, he said. Like it never happened. Like it never happened. My family's 5 favorite words, offered to me one last time, free of charge, by an honest man with a level. I looked at that hole for a while, the cavity my father framed with a router because even his secrets got finish work. The little black rectangle where 3 decades of darkness had sat banded like currency. And I heard myself say it, and I knew it was the truest sentence I'd produced all year. No, don't patch it. Make it a shelf. Sal looked at the hole, then at me, and something moved behind his weathered face. He'd apprenticed under my father 30 years ago, he told me later. First thing Walt ever taught him was measure twice, and he wrote something short in the little notebook and said, "Shelf it is, ma'am." So that's what it is now. Oak, eased edges, dead level, right where the wall used to keep its mouth shut. And that's why the house came to me alone. The letters said it in one line I'll give you. You're the only one in this family, kiddo, who ever opened the books instead of the walls. 6 months now. I live in my father's house. My house. The deed and I are still getting used to each other. And the renovation came in $800 under my budget, which I mention because he would have loved that more than flowers on his grave. The pantry shelf holds one thing, A plain wooden box Sal built from workshop scrap, and inside it, 22 envelopes. Every Sunday morning, with coffee, I read 1 year of my father. I'm up to 2007, the year I got my CPA license. That letter says, "You balanced your first stranger's books this week. I hope someday somebody teaches you that you're allowed to charge your family too." I laughed out loud alone in a kitchen at that one, and then I cried, and both were fine. Brooke finished her diversion program in November. Her record is clean. Every month, an envelope arrives with a check for $85, her half of the repair, on a payment plan she set up herself, and she writes the memo lines like tiny telegrams. Wall, Part 3. Wall, Part 4. In December, on a rainy Tuesday, I came home and found something on the porch, set carefully out of the wet. My father's wristwatch, the one Brooke had quietly taken off his workshop windowsill back in March. Before any of this, because taking things in the dark was the only family language she'd ever been taught. Under it, a note. No hoodie and saw defiance left in the handwriting at all. He'd want it in the house. B. I put the watch on the pantry shelf next to the letterbox. It keeps perfect time. We're not healed, my sister and I. But somebody's paying down the right debt, at last, in daylight. My mother has not called. She tells her version at church, a misunderstanding, a grieving widow, an ungrateful daughter. And the people who need that story believe it. And I've made my peace with being the villain in a theater I no longer attend. Aunt Pam stopped inviting me to holidays, which cost me less than the stamps on her cards used to. The town sorted itself the way towns do. I lost 2 more tax clients and gained 4, because it turns out Milford Falls contains a quiet minority of people who specifically want their books kept by the woman who wouldn't cook hers for her own mother. In late October, I saw her at the farmer's market, across the pumpkin tables. My mother, in her good fall coat, examining squash like it owed her an apology. She looked up. We held it for about 3 seconds, the whole 35 years of it, over the gourds. She didn't come toward me. I didn't go toward her. And I want to be honest with you about what I felt because the internet loves a clean ending and I don't have one. It still hurts. Choosing daylight doesn't anesthetize you. It just stops the interest from compounding. She's my mother. She was also the collector of a debt she decided I owed from birth, and those 2 facts live in the same woman, and I finally love her from the only distance where both facts can be true. That Sunday, I read the letter marked 2008, my college year. My father wrote, "The girl carries the whole family on her back and calls the weight love. Somebody someday better tell her to set it down." Somebody did, Dad. You did. It just took a wall coming open. Every wall gets open someday, kiddo. My father built hiding places for 40 years and left me the key to the last one. And the only thing inside worth keeping was this. A family isn't what you protect in the dark. It's what can survive the light. That's my story. 1 wall, 1 brass key, 22 letters, and an oak shelf where the dark used to live. If you've ever been the one who kept the family books quiet, who absorbed the differences, who kept the story straight at your own expense, maybe this is your sign to open them. Share this video with someone who's still standing at the teller's window of a family that never intended to pay. Drop a comment telling me what you would have done that Friday, with the pen in your hand and the cookies on the counter. Hit subscribe if this one landed somewhere true. And I'll see you in the next one, in daylight.